Are we on? Hi, good afternoon, folks. This is Jim Hodson and Gary Goff with you here at the Fort Worth Aviation Museum, home of the most touchable warbirds in Texas. We've also got John Ezrow, one of our lead docent, with us today, and he's operating the camera and will let us know if any of you have any questions. We're here today to talk about Bessie Coleman. We're going to be talking about some other people too while we're doing this, but being Black History Month and the fact that we think Bessie Coleman may be a little bit understood or misunderstood or needs to dispel some of the myths and talk about some of the realities. Gary's showing you a picture right now of her with her Jenny, JN4 Jenny, which is what the big model is that we have here, and her in her uniform. This was way later in her career. Bessie started out as the 10th child of a family in Atlanta, Texas. Her mother said that she'd always given her a hard time as being the 10th child. She was a little bit headstrong. But the family moved to Waxahachie, and then a little bit later, her father, who was also Cherokee, moved back to Oklahoma, where he had come from. And Bessie eventually went up there so that she could try to go to college. She had been educated in Texas a little bit, and I think before we even get too far into this, I want to kind of set the stage so that you have a feeling for the day and time that Bessie was growing up here. You know, we're talking about essentially 1900 to 1910, and so we're talking about a period of time here that was really only within 50 to 60 years of the Vietnam, not the Vietnam War, of the Civil War. So for us now, that's about the same time that we are away from the Vietnam War. So many of the same feelings and attitudes were still prevalent.
We're getting comments. It says bring them on camera.
No, that's bringing those individuals on camera. We're not doing that.
Okay.
So there were a lot of the same attitudes that still prevailed right after slavery. The Jim Crow laws were in effect, which meant that everybody had separate but equal issues. So there were white entrances and colored entrances to facilities. So that's the world that she was growing up in. So she goes to Oklahoma, goes to college for a little while she could afford it. But Bessie always wanted more. She started out saying that she did not want to be a cotton farmer. She didn't want to be picking cotton and working in the fields. So that's why she tried to go to college. That didn't work out really well, but her brother, now we're getting up towards the time of the First World War, and her brother had had been in the Army and went to war, and he was up in Chicago and invited her to Chicago. So Bessie decided, as part of the Great Migration, she's going to go to Chicago, where she can hopefully have better opportunities and better her life. So she got up there and she started working in a barber shop. She'd gone to beautician school, and so she was a manicurist. And so she's in Chicago, and what was taking place at the barber shop is some of the soldiers were coming in from the war, and she had heard about a gentleman named Eugene Bullard, or Eugene Bullard. We've got a picture of him right here. And this is where her inspiration for aviation came from. Eugene Bullard was the first black fighter pilot in the world.
In the world.
In the world. And I know there's a lot of talk about African Americans, but we're going to take that a step up. He was the first black fighter pilot in the world. There were a handful of other pilots at that point in time, but his route to becoming a pilot was equally as difficult as Bessie's was. But he chose a different path. He didn't want to be a pilot from the very beginning. He wanted to leave Georgia, son of a mother who was Native American, and her father who had been a slave, and he wanted to leave. And he'd heard that in France he would be treated equally. So his goal, his desire was to go to Paris and to go to some place where it wouldn't matter what the color of his skin was. Well, he eventually gets there after a number of years doing a number of different things. This drive and desire was that strong that he got to Paris and felt that he'd made it to the place that he had hoped to live out his life, and that it was what he wanted. And then fate intervened, and within a few months, the First World War began. Gene decided that he was going to support his new country, France, and enlisted in the military. He wasn't allowed to enlist in the French army because he wasn't French. He was an American. So he joined the Foreign Legion. He was highly decorated. He was at the Somme. He was at Verdun, where he was injured. He was injured badly, and part of his convalescence was at another hospital where he met some aviators and some other people. Eventually, they were cleared to go back into the army. So he and another friend were in Paris, and they were starting to talk over wine and celebration and things like that, and talking about what they were going to do. And one of Gene's friends said, "Well, he was going to become part of this new American unit, this Lafayette Escadrille, and he was going to learn to be a pilot." And Gene said, "Well, I'm going to be a pilot too." Until that point in time, he'd never expressed a desire to be a pilot, and so between the two of them, they made a bet. Whoever was going to be the first one to become a pilot was going to win the money, was going to win $2,000.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money at that point in time. So at any rate, that's where Gene ends up getting transferred over to the Lafayette Escadrille, where he flew with people like Billy Mitchell and Frank Luke and Raoul Lufberry and the son of Teddy Roosevelt and these people. He ended up, and this was the thing that he always found as he was over there, for the most part, he was treated as an equal. Being an African American or a person of color was not a detriment, it was a curiosity. And so at any rate, he becomes a pilot, ended up flying 26 combat missions with 2 unconfirmed kills. So after that, it becomes a different story, but that is the inspiration for Bessie to become a pilot.
And if you, back 2006, there's a wonderful book on him. Back in 2006, there was a movie called Flyboys that was loosely based. They had a character in the movie loosely based on it, and his first name was Eugene, just like Eugene Bullard. But anyways, you get an idea of what it was like in the Lafayette Escadrille. You can go watch that movie, Flyboys.
It's a good movie, and one of the Gary's got this up here. The book is entitled "All Blood Runs Red," and this is a little bit of a play of words on what Gene had on his airplane. His logo, or his personal insignia, was a bleeding heart with the words "All wounds bleed red," and so that was kind of his slogan in war. It didn't make any difference the color of your skin, because we're all the same. So at any rate, this is the inspiration for Bessie to become a pilot.
She's very inspired.
Yeah, very inspired by this, and the stories and have been regaled. So she determines that that's what she wants to do, and so she goes around to the Chicago area and starts to ask flight schools about learning to be a pilot, and they all just kind of turned her away. They said, "Well, you're a woman and you're black. So you're a woman and you're black. So we're not going to be able to teach you here." Plus the fact that most people didn't feel that she would have the mental acuity or being a woman to be able to operate these kind of complicated machines. So obviously that was a detriment, but she didn't quit. And she made known to people around her what she wanted to do. And she became a friend of, or mentored by, a gentleman who was the editor of the Chicago Defender, which was the black newspaper in Chicago, and also by a gentleman named Binga, who opened the first black bank in Chicago. So these people became mentors to her to some extent. So they helped her go to Berlitz School in Chicago and learn French, because she was told, well, if you go to France like Bullard did, you'll be able to learn to fly. They'll teach you.
However, you have to be able to speak French.
You had to be able to speak French, right? So English was not the international language of aviation at that point in time. So she goes to Berlitz, learns French, and makes her way with the support of these people, and makes her way to France. One of her first real revelations was that she was getting away from the prejudices that she had grown up with and around. And keep in mind, in 1919, there were huge race riots across the United States, in Chicago, in Houston, all over the place. She gets on one of the largest ocean liners in the world at that point in time to go to Paris, and there's 900 passengers, and she's the only person of color on the boat. And she was treated by all of them, who were French for the most part, as equally as the rest of them. And so that was one of her first big revelations. Well, she gets to Paris, and jump in here anytime you want.
Go on, keep going.
Well, actually, it wasn't even Paris. It was a little,
No.
it was a little town outside of Paris, but it was for the flight school. They immediately accepted her. I think there was probably a little bit, you know, she speaks French. How's your math? You know, some of those kinds of things probably. And she was good at math.
Yeah, she excelled at that in school.
She excelled
They
at
said
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she goes to the school, and the course is 7 weeks long. And the people at the school determine that she's a natural pilot. They determine that right away. So she's able to complete in the 7. It was either 7 weeks or 7 months. I don't remember right now, but it was.
I think it's 7 months.
I think it was 7
yeah,
months.
7 months.
So
yeah.
she completes, and it was interesting the way they started. I mean, they started with little devices that didn't fly but looked like airplanes, just so you could learn to taxi them around, and then you learn to taxi an airplane, and then you learn by just taking straight off out of the field, and then later on it got more and more complicated and that kind of thing. But she graduates. Now after she graduates, she decides to tour around Europe for a while.
Yes, she does tours around, and what's I think one of the most fascinating things about her touring of Europe is when the people that she meets.
Yeah.
How do you get in that type of a circle? That she must be extremely dedicated person.
Yeah.
Because even today we can't hang around some of these people
Right.
in these circles, and she's talking to just normal people. She's talking to or that would have been just like normal today. Anthony Fokker.
Anthony Fokker. Yeah.
I mean, this guy, Anthony Fokker, Holland-based, grew up in Holland, and she's just hanging out with this guy because he's the guy who ends up designing these airplanes that are famous in World War I. The triplane that the Red Baron flew. I mean, he's the guy who designed this, and he's the guy who figured out how to do an interrupter gear on the guns that were in the front of the German fighters, which shot through the propeller. Now, they didn't shoot through the propeller. The gun interrupted every time the propeller was right in front of the guns, and then it shot again. And he figured that out by he and his buddy throwing rocks at windmills in Holland. So she's talking to this guy. She's friends with Anthony Fokker. How much do you learn? Well, you and I both know this in the bars, and just how much you actually gain in how does an aircraft fly, which had to have really increased her that quote natural ability.
Yeah.
Now it takes it to another level. That's what I find fascinating with Bessie. She didn't let anything stand in her way. She drove and she found what she needed to find.
You know, one of the things
I
didn't mention is she gets her license, and it's an international license. And
Yes.
we often say that Bessie Coleman was the first African American woman and Native American woman to have a pilot's license. It's really more than that. She was the first woman of color to have an international pilot's license, which is far bigger deal than just being an American. This is the first woman and the first woman of color with an international license. There were other women. There was Matilda Moissant, but she was learning because her brothers were flying. There was Amelia Earhart, who didn't get her license until 2 years after Bessie.
2 years after Bessie.
There were others, Hornby and Catherine Stinson, who learned because of her brothers. So this is this woman who goes on essentially on her own with some backing, and she's done this. Now while she's in Europe, and I'm sure part of the circles that she got into is because she's a pilot now. She's one of the guys in some respects. She's a pilot, and everybody goes, and she's a natural. So before she comes back, she also meets another group of people called Dornier.
Dornier. This is a famous builder, especially in World War II. Oh my gosh.
And they're still building airplanes. So she gets invited to help test a new airplane.
She's going to test. She's the test pilot of this beast of an aircraft.
Dornier's first flying boat.
A flying boat. And she's the test pilot. Things are so much, that's what's so cool about over there. And what she's doing is that, hey, you got the credentials, let's go.
Yep.
Let's go.
Now you may get tested.
Well,
because they want to, because the pilots do that. It's like, well, okay,
that's normal,
you say you're good, or you've got this, you got that, but let's go fly and see, right? So
Yeah,
I'm sure,
I'm
sure there was a lot of that going on, but she was also learning acrobatics, you know, and those kinds of things. And she's learning from people at that point in time who were World War I veterans. She flew with and learned from one of the German pilots who ended up being an ace in the Second World War, a Luftwaffe ace. So at any rate, with all of these achievements, she now comes back to the United States and is expecting to come back and take the country by storm, because now she's decided that what her goal in life is going to be is to create a flight school where other people of color and other girls can learn to become pilots. That becomes her goal. She's achieved this goal of becoming a pilot, and now has found that there's even a bigger goal. Garry and I have talked a little bit, and this is just an aside, but both of these people, Bullard and Coleman both, and any of the other people of color who learned during that period of time, had to have desire, dedication, and determination to be able to achieve their goal of becoming a pilot.
You have to.
Garry and I had challenges, but nothing like what these people had to deal with. Nothing at all like what they had. If I had to deal with the issues that they did, I don't know that I would have been a pilot, frankly. So at any rate, Bessie comes back to acclaim. I mean, as opposed to Bullard, where the press here would not talk about him at all. The press would not talk about Bullard back here at all because they didn't want to talk about a black pilot here in the United States, especially in America.
A
successful black pilot. So his name doesn't come up at all, or if it does, it doesn't refer to him as being a person of color. So at any rate, Bessie comes back, and she goes back to Chicago initially. It starts to fly a little bit in some of the shows. And it's people are coming just to see this happen. How can this woman of color, this woman of color, be a pilot and be able to do these things? And they just wanted to watch her do her work. She also did some parachute jumping and some of those kinds of things.
And all of it was acrobatics. So she's flying these flimsy airplanes, and she's doing all sorts of aerobatic maneuvers. And we know that in order to do just like a loop, as you come down on the bottom of the loop, as you're coming down here, you're pulling about 3 Gs to get the airplane around. And this is real flexible and flimsy, and you put 3 times the force of gravity, I'm surprised these things didn't snap. And it's just amazing what she's doing. Aggressive aerobatics.
Yes.
Aggressive barnstorming. Oh, my gosh.
And she's just there right with the other guys, right with the other people who are in it. Well, eventually, Bessie's fame grows and she starts to do other things. Well, one of the things that she wanted to do was become a commercial pilot.
Guess what?
They wouldn't let her become a commercial
Ain't
pilot.
gonna happen.
No, that was
black.
She's black, so
And she's a woman.
And she's a woman. So even though she'd flown this giant flying boat for Dornier, well, that's Europe. That's not here. So at any rate, she continues to do the shows. She starts to work with and put together a show of her own, which were called the Black Wings, and it was other black pilots who were coming along, and there were black pilots who were doing some amazing things back in the 20s. There was a group of 2 guys, for instance, who did one of the first cross country flights. It took them like 19 days.
Standard.
Because they had to go to airports that would allow them to land, allow them to services. People who other African Americans and people of color would bring them food and help work on their planes and things like that. I mean, there's amazing stories here. But at any rate, she's in California at one point, and she wants her own airplane.
So she gets it.
But she had to do it in California because it was illegal in most states of the country for a woman, and a black woman at that, to own an airplane. So she ends up in California, manages to buy a Jenny, and immediately goes out and crashes it.
She's about 500 feet above the ground. She's only going to fly about 15 miles north of where she took off to be able to start it, to be in part of an air show. And as she's flying just 500 feet above the ground, that's not that far, but it has significant engine trouble. Something had to happen. We don't know exactly what it is, but the airplane goes down into the ground and crashes, and she's unconscious.
Yeah.
Breaks ribs
and a leg, and she's in the hospital for, I think it was months, like 3 months.
Somebody runs in there and pulls her out of the bird and puts her in the hospital.
Yeah, and the airplane was completely destroyed. And
probably she didn't burn up.
Yeah, and she was lucky. I mean, saw pictures of it. It didn't catch fire for some reason, but she was in the hospital for a long time, and that would have dissuaded a lot of people. But her convalescence was just as long afterwards, and she decided it was even more desired to continue this. So she continues to fly, and she gets to the point now where she's seeing the effect of the Jim Crow laws down south and up north, and how they were different. In Chicago, it was literally a day and night thing. During the daytime, you either use white entrances or black or colored entrances, that kind of thing. But at night, everybody was together, jazz in the bars, and the restaurants and everything, especially certain parts of Chicago. But in the daytime, it was different. In the South, it wasn't. It was always black or white in the South. So she started doing air shows down south, and she would refuse to fly.
This is awesome.
She would refuse to fly the show unless the people of color were allowed to get into the show, because in some of them they weren't even allowed to be at the venue, which was a county fair or something like that. The only words where they could go to would be a colored county fair, where she would fly at those fairs. So she made it a part of her deal when she was flying, is that the local people of color had to be able to come in, and even went to the point of saying, and they have to come through the same entrance as the whites.
See, and it's so bad. Even here in Dallas, my dad told me, growing up here in Dallas, that the state fair here that's held here in Dallas, they would just have color day. That was the only time the blacks could go in. I think that's what he called. I think that's something just like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's all over the South, and what Queen Bess is doing is she's forcing the local area to realize we're talking about human beings.
Yeah.
Not black and white, but human beings. Anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, she spent a lot of time at Love Field, too, apparently, and while she was here in the area. So, towards the end of her career, she spent most of her time here in Texas, Dallas and Houston, and I want to say it was San Antonio.
Yeah, and one other town.
Kind of the areas, and what her goal was to establish flight schools here, and she was going to start here in Texas. And so she was working with a lot of people at that point in time. Still didn't own her own airplane, and so she was then contracted to go to Florida and do an air show in Florida. And so she goes there, but she doesn't have an airplane, and there's nobody in Florida who will rent her an airplane.
Nope.
After all of these years and all of the exhibitions of her flying skills, nobody will rent her an airplane in Florida. So, and I'm not certain where the airplane came from. I think it was Texas, but she got in touch with a mechanic and who was going to rent an airplane and bring it over, and he brought it over to Florida, and they were going up in a flight prior to the show. And at this show, this was another one where she said, "I will not fly unless the local people of color can come to the show through the white entrance and sit in the same seats up close so they can see me fly." And she was she was noteworthy enough that they agreed to these things. So they went out and threw out leaflets in the neighborhoods of the people of color, so that they would know that they could come to the air show and that they could have the same seating and that kind of stuff. So it was after that they were going up to do something with the airplane, and there was some kind of an issue. She was with her mechanic, who was in the airplane. She was in the back seat.
So she's back here.
She's in the back seat.
The front seater's up there.
And something's going on, and they couldn't quite tell. There's communications back and forth other than yelling. Okay, so she unbuckles her seat belt so she can get a better view inside the front cockpit. And when that happens, the airplane pitches or goes over, and she falls out.
She falls right out of here.
From 2,000 feet, falls to her death.
Because she's not strapped in.
The airplane continues on and goes straight into the ground.
And kills the front seater.
Kills the front seater and is burned. In the wreckage, they found a tool that had jammed the controls. We've both seen enough accident investigations to know that there's always a tool in an airplane in an accident. Whether it caused it or not, it's always there. But that ended her career, obviously.
Ended her life.
But it did not end her goal.
No, one of the This guy is one of the people in her circles, and his last name is Powell. No, it's not General Powell, which we're used to, but it's, and who knows, he may be related to him or not. But this gentleman right here picks up the what would you call it, this drive that Queen Bess had to get the flight school going. And he picks it up, and he is a bulldog on it. He is going to get it happen. And it was 3 years?
Yeah, about
3 years. 3 years later, there you are. You're looking at her flight school.
The first.
That's the first school.
The first of several that were established
Bessie
around
Coleman
the country.
Flight School, Aero Club. That's the Bessie Coleman Aero Club, I think, if I remember.
I think that was the name of it. It started in Houston. There was one in California, and there were some others around the country. And this is what she started. It was her drive, determination, and dedication to become her own pilot, and then her dreams afterwards that rang true with a lot of people. And I mean, she inspired a lot of people with what she did, not only to become pilots, but just to strive for things. And that was one of the things that as I studied Bullard and Bessie and some of the others, is that these people all had a desire and a dedication and a determination to follow their goals, even when there were challenges put up. In no case did somebody say, I need a handout. Hands up, yes, because they got that. And you're going to see that today. We've all seen that. If you show somebody that you're really dedicated and desire and going to put out the effort to do something, there will be people along the way who will help you. You know, whether it was somebody who helped Gene learn how to be a boxer so that he could help him make money to go to France, or people who could help him get into aviation, and with her, getting to Chicago, getting to language school, getting to Europe, and those kinds of things. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I've seen with all of these, is it's all about your desire, having a goal, and being willing to go out and go after it and achieve it. Some of the other things that came out of this, and this is why we've got the Tuskegee P-51 here, the Red Tails, is all of that kind of came out of what Queen Bess did here. There were enough people who were against it for a while. The only state in the United States that was really friendly to people of color learning to fly was Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. That was it. They could have commercial licenses, flew the mail, flew passengers, did all kinds of things. It eventually spread, but outside of France, that was it. Well, then as the wars start to come up, people want to get involved and do things, and they want to be pilots and this and that. And so part of the civilian pilot training program became training people of color, mostly men of color. Well, the people who were instrumental in getting the CPTP together and functioning, and then that growing into the Tuskegee Airmen, were Roosevelt, the president, and Harry Truman. Those were a couple of the people who really pushed to have this happen and get it through and work. So Gary's got...
Returning back, this is going to be it's called a shameless plug or something?
Yeah,
no,
sure.
That would be because if I was the author, but I'm not
or
the
if you
author.
were selling
but
yeah.
I'm not selling it. So it's neither. It's just a promotion.
Yeah.
Jim bought a whole bunch of books here, and I was just kind of fanning through this. If you have an individual, a young person that wants to learn about this, this is probably one of the best color cartoon books that I have seen on Bessie Coleman. It's incredible. One, just the drawings, but the dialogue boxes and everything else. This is a great way to teach, to have somebody, a school-age kid, gain an appreciation and knowledge of Bessie. Because the thing that we see, that we know, is that making excuses doesn't do you. You're not going to accomplish anything by making excuses. Bessie didn't make any excuses. We didn't make excuses.
Yeah.
You have to go.
Well, you
do
did in
these
the
things.
bar.
Well, you did in the bar. That's different. That's different. That's completely different.
Yeah.
But is that she refused to make an excuse, and she had this goal. She drove to it, and that's what I like about her, and that's what I think is so cool, is that excuse wasn't part of her vocabulary.
No. There's a bunch of books. I'm going to show them briefly. If people want, and you let us know, we'll put these out. But these are in the library here now.
Cool.
But this is one of them, and I love the title of this one. It kind of goes along with Bullard's, and all wounds bleed red. But this one is Nobody Owns the Sky.
How appropriate.
And it's so appropriate for her, because that was for a lot of people, and we've all done this. Flying is freedom. So
yes, that's exactly one of her big quotes. Flying is freedom.
So this is on Bullard. This is a good book. You can also get an audio book of this one, and it's a good read or listen. There's more stuff about Bessie, Stars and Beyond, Stories of Black Heroes in aviation. This one,
You talk about that, Black Wings.
Black Wings. This is about the early black aviators around the country and the things and the exploits and the things that they did. Of course, we've got the Tuskegee Airmen, the chronology of how that all took place. And then there's another one here that's a good one. It's called Blue Skies, Black Wings. So, and there's tons more of this stuff, tons more. But I'm going to go back to the thing that impressed me about all of these people that I've read about, and Gary's already hinted on it, is that these people had a desire to do something. They were determined to get there, and they were dedicated to it, regardless of what got in their way. Like I said, no excuses. And people recognize that. Mm-hmm. And when they do, they always want to help. You're going to find somebody who's going to help. Be a mentor, help open some doors, help things happen, help you achieve those things. And it's available to anybody, but the first thing is you have to have a goal. So I'm going to say to the young people who are going to watch this and the young people who come here to the museum all the time, what's your goal? What is it that you want to do with your life? Because you can do it, but you have to want to.
And when the door opens, you got to walk through it.
Yep, got to be ready to do that. Have the courage for that. So
no excuses.
I don't know, John, if we got any comments or questions that you want to share.
We have one here from Francisco Sandoval.
Okay.
If any of y'all's planes need to be repainted, send a DM. We are at Jim as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we'll put them on the truck and send them down there.
Yeah, we'll do that.
I love it.
So, at any rate, unless there's any other questions, and we'll give it another short bit of time here. But we've actually gone way over today.
Way over time.
But this is a great story. It's a great American story, and it's a great human interest story. Highly encourage you to find out more about Bessie Coleman. She's from Atlanta. There's a little museum over there that actually has an airplane. Atlanta, Texas. I'm sorry.
Make sure we know that.
Yeah, Atlanta, Texas. That actually has a Jenny over there that is a kind of a representation of the ones that she flew. So there's a lot more here at the museum. So come on out and visit with us. And we're going to do more about some of the personalities here. We were talking earlier that we're going to do a little bit more on things like Squadron 201, the Aztec Eagles.
Yes.
That's another good one, and some of the other stuff. So unless we've got some questions, we're going to say thanks for being with us today here at the Fort Worth Aviation Museum, home to the most touchable warbirds in Texas. And John, you can hit the button that says finish.
See ya.